By the time the second bull started approaching the HOA president's designer heels, the charcuterie board was absolute chaos. People were screaming, folding chairs were toppling over, and a Bluetooth speaker was still playing smooth jazz over the sound of pure bovine confusion. 2 board members hid behind a stack of tables, while a third tried to calm a 1,500-pound Hereford named Donut. And right in the center of it all, standing calmly by the barn door with a padlock in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, was my grandfather. He gave me a little nod through the window as Sandra Merriweather shrieked that someone needed to call 911 because these cows weren't community approved. Grandpa took a slow sip, then turned the key in the lock. Click. The bulls snorted. The HOA screamed. And that, in case anyone ever asks, is how the Maple Hollow Meadows HOA Spring Social became the first neighborhood event to require both an ambulance and a livestock trailer. My name is Elliot Briggs, and technically, I'm the owner of the property. It's 10 acres just outside Clover Run, one of those small towns where people still wave when they pass you on the road, and gossip moves faster than any internet connection. I work remotely as a data analyst, which means I sit in front of numbers all day while wearing the same hoodie and pretending the coffee isn't just anxiety in liquid form. The land itself has been in our family for generations. We've got a farmhouse older than most people's grandparents, a red barn that's been repaired more times than my car, and a fenced pasture for my grandfather's small herd of bulls. Grandpa Walter Briggs is 78, permanently in overalls, and runs entirely on coffee and stubbornness. He was born on that land, and he plans to stay there, preferably while yelling at something with hooves. The problem started when the sprawl reached us. The Maple Hollow Meadows subdivision popped up on the other side of our back fence, a sprawling HOA paradise full of identical houses, granite countertops, and people who said we when they really meant the HOA. At the head of it all was Sandra Merriweather, HOA president, self-described community curator, and the type of woman who used the phrase property values the way some people say bless your heart. She introduced herself the week they finished the subdivision sign. She showed up in a white SUV, heels too high for gravel, clutching a leather clipboard. "We're going to be such good neighbors," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Our HOA is very proactive about aesthetics." Grandpa nodded slowly, then looked at her carefully. "We've been proactive about cows since before your houses had plumbing," he replied calmly. That was the beginning. The real conflict started when she decided our barn was shared community property. For a while, it was just annoying. Sandra started small with complaints about the smell of the pasture, snide remarks at the grocery store about rustic clutter, and passive-aggressive flyers about modernizing the area left in our mailbox. Then came the letter. On HOA letterhead, no less. Notice of Community Alignment Opportunity. The Maple Hollow Meadows HOA will be hosting its spring social on April 16th and will be utilizing the Briggs outbuilding, meaning our barn, as an event venue, as it is the only suitably picturesque structure in reasonable proximity to our subdivision. Utilizing. No request. No question. Just a polite command. At the bottom, in neat cursive, it said "We're sure you understand." Signed Sandra Merriweather, HOA president. I marched into the kitchen waving the letter. "They can't do this, right?" I asked. Grandpa read it once, twice, then slowly took off his glasses. "Son, they got 2 problems," he said firmly. 1, that barn isn't theirs. 2, they wrote this down. I suggested we call a lawyer. Grandpa suggested something else. "Let them try it," he said with a slight grin. "You can't teach respect with words. But cows are pretty good at teaching consequences." I assumed he was joking. He was not. The day of the event, we posted a big hand-painted sign on the front gate. Private property, no entry. Not affiliated with Maple Hollow Meadows HOA. At 9 in the morning, 2 HOA board members showed up anyway, armed with clipboards and confidence. "We're here to set up for the spring social," one said brightly. Sandra cleared it with the county. Grandpa stepped out on the porch, coffee in hand. "County doesn't own my barn," he replied steadily. "You turn around, we won't have a problem." They didn't turn around. Instead, they sent an email later that morning. "Per our interpretation of easement and adjacency laws, your barn is considered an aesthetic asset to the community." Grandpa read it, made a sound in his throat, and went to check the pasture. That night, He told me very casually to make sure the side barn door was working and not to park near the fence on Saturday. Why? I asked. Because, he said calmly, Saturday's a good day for bulls to stretch their legs. Saturday arrived like a disaster waiting to happen. The HOA caravan rolled in late morning, SU versus crossover vehicles, and one guy with a truck full of folding chairs, all dressed in pastel outfits. They parked along the road, ignored our private property signs, and marched toward the barn like they had received a royal invitation. I was at the kitchen window, watching with my mug halfway to my mouth. They're actually doing it, I said quietly. Yep, Grandpa replied without looking up as he tightened a gate latch. Been doing stupid things since they moved in. Consistency is important. We watched as they strung fairy lights across the barn doors, set up tables inside with expensive cheese and tiny pickles, rolled in a bar cart with champagne flutes, and hung a huge vinyl banner that read Maple Hollow Meadows Spring Social. Not one of them knocked. Not one of them asked permission. At some point, I noticed something else. Grandpa had quietly moved his bulls into the small pasture attached to the back of the barn, a fenced area that connected through a large sliding door we almost never used. The bulls, 3 of them, snorted and stomped, watching the activity with growing interest. Grandpa, I said slowly, what are you planning? He shrugged casually. City folks want to occupy a working barn. They can meet the workers. By noon, the party was in full swing. Sandra, in a floral dress and pearls, stood on a hay bale giving a speech about rural charm integration while eating an $8 cracker. She had draped a tablecloth over an actual manure fork. That's when a county sheriff's SUV pulled up to our driveway. My stomach dropped. They called the cops on us, I muttered. The deputy stepped out, hat low, posture relaxed. You Elliot Briggs, he asked. We got an anonymous complaint about livestock posing a community hazard. Grandpa made a sound. Let me guess who Anonymous is. The deputy looked over at the barn, then back at us. Mind if I ask you straight? Did you invite them onto your property? Nope, I said. Got it in writing they're not allowed, actually, Grandpa added, handing him the HOA letter and a photo of our private property sign. The deputy read it and whistled low. So they trespassed, then called us about your cows. Bulls, Grandpa corrected. The deputy tucked the papers away. Well now, he said thoughtfully. That does change things. He glanced at the barn, at the fairy lights, at the banner. You boys want to press charges? He asked. Grandpa smiled slowly. Not yet, he said. I figure they deserve a teachable moment first. The deputy considered this, scratched his chin, and finally asked if anybody would get really hurt. Just their feelings and those little fancy shoes, Grandpa said. The deputy tipped his hat. Then I didn't see anything, he replied. But if you do lock your barn, make sure you've got it on camera for the trespassing report later. Grandpa grinned widely. And that was the exact moment I realized we had official silence, a barn full of HOA members, and 3 restless bulls. We waited until the HOA was fully settled. They had set up a buffet, installed a photo booth with a rustic chic backdrop, and started playing acoustic music that made my soul want to file a complaint. Sandra was in full campaign mode, handing out flyers about new enforcement initiatives and bragging about strict paint color rules. Grandpa slipped out the back door. I followed him to the side of the barn, where the big sliding door to the bullpen sat latched. You sure about this? I asked nervously. He gave me a look. You like them walking in here like they own it? No. You like them calling the law on us while trespassing? No. He gestured at the barn. Then let the boys say hello. He opened the back gate into the barn slowly, just enough that the bulls could smell the food, the people, the noise. Bulls are not complicated creatures. They saw movement, they heard sounds, they smelled meatballs. And in what I could only describe as a slow-motion avalanche of muscle and curiosity, they decided to investigate. Grandpa and I circled around to the front, acting casual as HOA members refilled their plates. Inside, the first bull, Donut, stepped through the back door, hooves heavy on the barn floor. A woman screamed. Someone shouted, "Is that a cow?" No, Sandra snapped, already annoyed. It's part of the authentic rural experience. Then Donut stepped fully into the light, followed by Tank and Pickles, all three snorting, tails flicking, eyes wide at the sight of a balloon arch and a cheese board. The music cut off. Silence. Then complete chaos. People scrambled onto hay bales, dropped plates, and tried to hide behind each other. Someone shrieked that they have horns, which, to be fair, was accurate. Grandpa calmly walked to the main sliding barn doors and grabbed the rope. He looked right at me. "You recording?" he asked. I held up my phone. "Yup." He slid the barn doors shut, wrapped a chain around the handles, then clicked a padlock into place. From inside came panicked voices. "Who locked us in? Someone call 911. They're eating the pasta salad." Grandpa leaned against the doorframe, sipping his coffee, completely unbothered. "You think this is enough?" I asked. "Give them 30 minutes, he said calmly. "They'll figure out real quick whose property this is." 30 minutes of bull-assisted education later, the real cavalry arrived. Another sheriff's car, a county animal control truck, and because karma has a sense of humor, a local news van. Apparently someone inside had managed to call 911 and describe the situation as being held hostage in a barn with dangerous cattle by a hostile landowner. The deputy from earlier stepped out first, taking in the scene. HOA members screaming from the barn windows, bulls wandering happily among fallen decorations, fairy lights flickering like emergency beacons. "Mr. Briggs," he said, keeping his voice steady, "are your animals attacking the party?" Grandpa shrugged. "They're just walking around. This is their barn." Party came to them. From inside, Sandra shrieked that they were endangering everyone. The deputy raised his voice. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on their property. We already established that." She tried to pivot. "We have a community right to this space. It's an aesthetic asset." Animal control walked around the side, peeked through a crack, and started laughing. "They're not charging, they're just existing," he said with amusement. "Looks like your folks are more of a danger to themselves than the bulls are." The news crew started rolling. A reporter with perfect hair whispered that this was gold to her cameraman. The deputy turned to Grandpa. "You want to unlock that door now?" he asked. Grandpa nodded. "Yeah, I think the lesson has sunk in." He unchained the doors and slid them open. The scene inside looked like a decorating magazine had been hit by a livestock tornado. People stumbled out, covered in hay and regret. A guy in a pastel polo had hoof prints on his dropped blazer. Sandra stomped out last, hair ruined, shoes muddy, clutching her pearls like they could sue on her behalf. "This is outrageous," she shrieked. "He locked us in there with wild animals." Grandpa took another sip of coffee. "They're not wild," he said. "They're registered. Can show you the paperwork." The deputy stepped between them. "You entered his barn without permission," he said firmly. "Ignored written notice. Then tried to get him in trouble for his own livestock." Sandra opened her mouth to argue, but he held up his hand. "Ma'am, you and your board are formally trespassed from this property. Any future entry without permission will result in arrest." The reporter perked up. "Can you say that again for the camera?" The HOA board members suddenly found the ground very interesting. Sandra's face turned a color that didn't exist in nature. "This will destroy our property values," she snapped. The reporter turned to Grandpa. "What do you think about that, sir?" Grandpa looked straight at the camera. "If your property values are scared of cows, you've got bigger problems than me," he said simply. The clip hit the evening news. And thanks to the internet doing what it does best, it was soon everywhere under the title "HOA hijacks barn, gets trapped with bulls, sheriff sides with farmer." You could practically feel Sandra's world collapsing. The fallout came quickly. Within a week, 3 board members resigned from the HOA, 2 homeowners petitioned to recall Sandra as president, and the county sent a formal letter reminding the HOA that their authority does not extend beyond their subdivision. The state's HOA oversight agency opened an inquiry into misuse of positional authority after several homeowners admitted Sandra claimed she had jurisdiction over adjacent properties. At the next Maple Hollow Meadows meeting, Sandra attempted a comeback speech. "We must not let this unfortunate incident undermine our vision," she said, voice shaking. "We stand for order. We stand for standards. We stand for excellence." A resident interrupted her by playing the news clip on his phone at full volume. The recall vote wasn't even close. Sandra Merriweather was removed as HOA president and banned from serving on the board for 5 years due to what the official document called behavioral and leadership concerns, which is homeowner association code for you're a problem. When the vote was announced, Sandra stood frozen at the podium, face pale, mouth open in shock, as the room erupted in relieved applause and she realized her reign of petty tyranny was finally over.